Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Physical damage is quite dangerous in Path of Exile at the moment, and one of the ways that you can try to mitigate it is by not stacking normal defenses. You're not going to stack endurance charges, you're not going to stack physical damage mitigation. Instead, you're going to stack a whole bunch of sources of physical damage taken as a different element instead. This is done partially through flasks. The excellent unique flask Taste of Hate does this really well. It can be done with a lot of chess pieces like Lightning Coil and Cloak of Flame. But one of the best spots and one of the things that people often forget is that you can also get this stat on the helmet. Today, I wanted to talk about crafting physical damage mitigation helmets. There's a number of ways you can do this, and we're going to be focusing on ones that originate their lives as a delve item. These can be crafted at a very wide range of budgets and also in a few different forms, but they all have a similar crafting process, whether you're going for the low budget or the high budget, with a number of things in common. So I'm putting them all into one video for that reason. Now, if you're playing a life-based character that has extraordinary chaos resistance, then there is a physical damage taken as chaos version that's ideal for life builds that use things like the Fourth Vow, Divine Flesh, or just other builds that have extraordinary chaos mitigation, so above and beyond 75% chaos resistance. There is a chaos damage and energy shield version that is extremely expensive, and this is for people who are running Chaos Inoculation builds and want to really take those up to the stratosphere. However, don't attempt this particular version of the craft unless you're willing to spend 100 divines or more on a helmet. The third option is an elemental version, and this is much more universal here. This will have a mod like 10% physical damage taken as fire, and also an implicit that might be 7 or 8% physical damage taken as fire. And characters on a lower budget tend to be able to scale their fire resistance or their cold resistance or their lightning resistance quite a bit further than they can scale their chaos resistance. So these are really good. These are quite universally useful, whereas the chaos versions are much more niche. Now, you can do this at low, medium, and high budget, but the Chaos Inoculation version is absolutely extreme budget only. So let's quickly discuss the pieces we want together on an item. So we're going to want to have 10% physical damage taken as chaos as an explicit modifier. Now, it doesn't specifically need to be chaos. This could be lightning, fire, or cold instead. These only drop in Delve contains chaos items nodes, or the same for the element. They can rarely drop fractured, so you don't need to necessarily make them with a fracturing orb. They do sometimes drop as a fractured item. The second mod we want on the item is 9 to 10% mana reservation efficiency. This is rolled on it via a Deafening Essence of Loathing. The third thing we want is another good suffix, and then we want as many reasonable prefixes as we can afford to cram in. Now, how picky we are on these depends upon the budget we're using. Next, we want a useful Searing Exarch implicit. And then we want a carefully chosen Eater of Worlds implicit. Now, there are two good options you can go with. You can go with more of the physical damage from hits taken as X damage, which is what I would generally recommend. But for a lot of people, you're going to have a specific need of more mana reservation efficiency of skills. Both of these are good options, although I don't think there's anything really else that you would consider in the Eater of Worlds implicit slot. Ultimately, your final item will have 10% mana reservation efficiency and up to 18% physical damage shifted into elements, or you will have 10% physical damage shifted into elements, but then you can have up to 22% mana reservation efficiency. Depends which of those stats is more important in your build, and you'll be making that decision quite late in the crafting process. Now, one quick point of confusion, there exists a fire version of the damage taken as X mod, only a fire version that is a prefix. This drops from the map boss of the Lighthouse map. It's a pretty rare thing to see. It never drops fractured. You can only get it fractured by applying a fracturing orb to it. This can be a really good thing to make a helmet with, but it is a completely different crafting process to what we're going to be discussing in this video. So if you've got one of these, fantastic. Look for another way to craft it. Don't use these strategies. I personally think the best use for these is often with Elder Slayer exalts, but that's beyond the scope of this video. So what's our overarching strategy? If you are familiar with these things, good old puzzle cubes, you'll know the concept of fixing one layer first, and then once you've done that one layer, you then try and build up more pieces of the puzzle, and then eventually end up with a completely solved cube. What we want to do is essentially replicate this process in Path of Exile. So we're going to take a Suffixes first approach. Firstly, get all the suffixes as good as we can afford at our budget. Then we're only going to use methods that preserve those suffixes once we have them in place. The second thing is going to be prefixes, and the third thing is going to be Eldritch Mod finalization. The dream that we're trying to put together here, and this is one of the better examples of this crafting process that I've seen crafted in the Crucible expansion. This is not actually finished. The Eldritch Implicits are not finished on it. You could get 8% physical damage taken as cold in the Implicits, and you could get 16% cold recoup as well. And that would make the item better than it currently is. Now, your estimated cost to get this combination of items here is going to cost you 1 to 2 divines to get a pig-face bassinet with fractured 10% physical damage from hits taken as cold. Then to get Suffixes this good, it's going to take you about 50 Deafening Essences of Loathing. Then to get Prefixes this good, it'll take you something like 30 Eldritch Chaos Orbs. And then to get the best Implicits you can get on the item, you're looking something like 10 Orbs of Conflict, 60 Exceptional Embers, and also a number of Grand Icors that's not going to cost you very much. Budget versions of this item will be weaker and somewhat similar, mostly with the same mods but at lower tiers, and with quite a bit weaker prefixes in particular. So you won't have the tier 1 life and tier 1 hybrid life. You'll have to settle for something like tier 3 life and a completely undesired prefix. That's the sort of thing you're looking at. You'll still have the crafted mod if that's something you want though. Now, the lower your budget is, the more that you need to compromise on quality. And the budget alternative is going to compromise by sacrificing the mana reservation efficiency. That's the key loss that you're going to have in quality compared to the next budgets up, and that is a big loss. It's also going to mean that the first 2 steps of the craft are going to be quite different. Now, we'll start with the very lowest budget alternative here, and really what you're looking for in this case is a non-fractured helmet that has 10% of physical damage from hits taken as X damage. You want to have something that has that in conjunction with sort of okay, but not uber mods. What I suggest is that you start with a search that's going to pick up items that have 10% physical damage from hits taken as whatever, but that also have total resistances on them, about 60%, and that way you'll get something that's reasonably workable. So what you want to do is find a starting point like Corpse Ward through trading for it. Make sure it does not have non-Eldritch influence, so no Elder Slayer influences, no Shaper influence, no Elder influences, as those will make things less flexible. This item's not fractured, and you can't safely modify suffixes here at all, so all you can really do is use cheap Eldritch currencies to isolate prefixes and then to improve them. Now, Corpse Ward here already has a pretty good prefix on it. You're going to probably just be happy wearing this as it is. All you would really do is put a Benchcraft and exalt it, and then put on your Implicits. However, most of the time you won't have a good life roll. If this instead had 17 maximum life instead of 87, you would want to Eldritch Annul that off. And we'll come to that when we get to step 3. So if you're playing on a very low budget, you want to just start with something like this and then just jump ahead to step 3 and accept that your final result will be a bit weaker. Now, first step in crafting on any other budget is to trade for a starting point. Delve drops items with special modifiers, and a small percentage of these, about 2%, will have the special mod fractured on. These items cannot ever exceed item level 83, and that means a few specific mods can't roll on them. Now, dexterity strength hybrid bases are generally stronger because armor is so good right now, and anything with dexterity can roll spell suppression. But this is not a hard rule, and your character's needs might be different. You might be someone who wants to have a dexterity intelligence hybrid base because that's what your character needs with Ghost Shrouds. That's up to you. Eldritch Implicits might already be present on the item. If they are, that's fine. There's no harm to having them there. Now, if your starting point is going to be a Hubris Circlet, then be aware that physical damage taken as Chaos fractured onto a Hubris Circlet generally goes for 100 Divine Orbs or more all league, and even non-fractured versions are worth quite a bit. These are so valuable as fractured items that it is actually justified to generate these fractured items by the use of fracturing orbs, whereas in general it's a bit of a waste of fracturing orbs because it's cheaper to just trade for your starting point that you're after. Step 2, we're going to get suffixes via spamming essences. Now, the Deafening Essence of Loathing suffix, which is 9 to 10% mana reservation efficiency, is arguably the best suffix that you can roll on a helmet, other than, of course, the 10% physical damage shifting that is what we're building everything around. What you want to do here is keep applying essences, keep applying Deafening Loathings until your other suffix is perfect if you're on a high budget, tier 1 and useful if you're on a medium budget, or tier 3 plus and useful if you're on a low budget. And if you're on an ultra low budget, you're going to skip this step and just make do with an item that dropped with 2 resistances on it as the suffixes alongside the damage shifting mod. So where are we now? Our suffixes aren't changing any further. At this point, we have mana reservation efficiency and something else that is useful, and how good that is going to depend upon the tier of craft that you're going for, how much you're willing to invest. Prefixes are trash unless you are unusually lucky. You have no Eldritch mods of note. You might have them, but they're not important. And the next step is going to be the prefixes. Now here, we're going to take a fork in the path, because if you're going on a low budget, you're going to do it one way. If you're on a medium budget, you'll do it another. And if you're on a high budget, you'll do it another way again. So step 3, doing the prefixes. Let's talk about how to do this on the cheap first. Apply a low tier Eldritch Ember to the item. You do not care about the mod. All you're wanting to do with this is that you want to make the Searing Exarch dominant, because then that will influence how an Eldritch Orb of Annulment works. Now, the worst prefix you can have is a low tier life roll, 45 or less. If you've got one of these, then you want to replace it either with an Eldritch Chaos Orb, or with Eldritch Annuls and Eldritch Exalts, or Eldritch Annuls and Classic Exalted Orbs. If you're missing life, benchcraft it, but if you're not missing life, then benchcraft something useful from Jun, and then apply Exalted Orbs to fill in all missing mod slots on the item. And at this point, your prefixes are done, but your Eldritch Implicits still need work. If you're on a medium budget, how do you do step 3? In this case, we're going to make limited use of the Suffixes cannot be changed metamod. Now, instead of paying 2 Divine Orbs for it, we're going to use a Wild Bristle Matron Beast. These only come from Einhar's Memory of Harvest Beasts, and they generally sell in Trade League for about 1.2 Divines. Now, these Wild Bristle Matron Beasts will apply a random metamod to an item. Metamods being the crafts that cost Divine Orbs and that modify future crafting on the item. However, of the metamods, one is a prefix, 4 are suffixes, and this means that if there's no room for more suffixes on the item, the only metamod that can be added is Suffixes cannot be changed, and so that's what you're going to get. So you're going to want to make the item Searing Exarch dominant, and then if you have no room for more mods on the item, then you want to Eldritch Annul. Once you've done this, Beastcraft Suffixes can't be changed, and apply a Veiled Chaos Orb to the item. A quick recap on Veiled Chaos Orbs. These things first pick a number, 4, 5, or 6, and they appear to have an 8 to 3 to 1 bias on this. So 2/3 of the time it'll pick 4, 1/4 of the time it'll pick 5, and 1/12 of the time it'll pick 6. Not 100% certain on those numbers, but they're pretty close to that. Then they will remove all the mods from the item except mods that can't be removed, hence the use of prefixes cannot change. Then it's going to add firstly a Veiled mod, and then it's going to keep adding mods until it hits its target number. So this means that 2 times in 3, you're going to wind up with no prefixes except for your Veiled prefix. 1 time in 4, you're going to end up with 1 Veiled prefix, 1 normal prefix that's baked onto the item. And 1 time in 12, you're going to wind up with 1 Veiled prefix and 2 other prefixes on the item. And if you ever find yourself in that awkward spot where your prefixes are completely full, you can surgically remove a prefix with an Eldritch Annul, but you might remove the Veiled prefix, which is kind of ouch if it happens, because it resets you back to the start of this step. Now you want to benchcraft a mod that's undesirable. One that you could block here is a gem level one that's of no use to you, or another one is +1 maximum number of minions if that's no use to you. The purpose of the block mod is that it biases what you can get when you unveil a Veiled mod. If, for example, you have a bench-crafted mod +1 to the level of socketed AoE gems, this bans you from getting the Veiled mod +2 to the level of socketed AoE gems. The Veiled mods aren't actually determined until you take the item to Jun, and so this means that you can rig the odds in your favour somewhat. Repeat all steps until you're content with the item. There's actually a lot of good mods in the Veiled item pool, and each specific one is a greater than 30% chance to come up. Benchcraft life or something else you're missing, and then exalt the item out if there's any space for additional mods on it. Now, if you're on a high budget, step 3 is going to be a little bit different. We're going to make extensive use of Eldritch Chaos Orbs, or alternately, Eldritch Annuls combined with regular Exalted Orbs and Eldritch Exalted Orbs. You want the item to be Exarch dominant. Now, you want to use Eldritch Chaos Orbs, or a combination of either type of Exalted Orb in conjunction with Eldritch Annuls, until you've got tier 1 life on the item. This is going to take an average of about 36 Eldritch Chaos Orbs. If you've got 3 total prefixes, and this will be a rare situation to be in, then you need to go with an RNG Eldritch Annull and just hope that you don't lose the mod you care about. Next, you want to go with Suffixes Can't Change, which again is done with a Wild Bristle Matron Beast. And then you want to go for an RNG Ashling Slam. Now, one configuration you can be in is that this is a 50-50 slam. Another one, it's a 67-33 slam in your favour. But in all cases, you do have a risk of losing your tier 1 life roll, which is a moderately unpleasant experience, as it means you go back a step or 2. I estimate the average cost per success of this method at about 72 Eldritch Chaos, 2 Ashlings, and 2 Wild Bristle Matrons. So it's not cheap at all. Before you unveil, bench block +1 maximum minion count, unless you're on a build where that is a useful mod for you to have. For Chaos Inoculation, you are talking about the highest budget alternative here. Now, if your starting point is a Fractured Hubris Circlet, which is 100 Divine Orb base, then getting the prefixes right might require more Eldritch currency than exists in the Trade League market. You're going to want Tier 2 Energy Shield percent, because you can't get Tier 1 on an item level 83 item, and you're going to want to get Tier 1 Flat Energy Shield. Another option that you can consider here is fossils instead. Glyphic fossils can't roll the mana reservation efficiency suffix, but they can roll very good suffixes. What I suggest you at least consider, and ultimately you'll have to weigh up yourself which of these crafting methods is best, either going with the high budget alternative we were discussing or the fossil version. You could go with dense fossils, sanctified fossils, glyphic fossils, and then a fourth fossil that makes your preferred glyphic mod more likely to roll, with Eldritch currency and Eldritch exalts being used as appropriate. Now, let's talk about step 4, which is getting your implicits right. This is something that is done quite differently on low budget, medium budget, and high budget. The lower budget approach is to spam greater or grand Eldritch Icors until you have either 6% or 7% physical damage taken as chaos. Now, if you do this with graders, it's going to cost an average of 52 graders, which is going to be about 45 chaos at the time I was checking prices for this video. Or it'll take 57 Grand Icors if you go higher tier. The reason that it's more is that you also have a few extra mods in the pool, the ones that affect you when you're in the presence of a pinnacle boss. Now, it's 75% less if you're willing to accept physical damage taken as any of the 4 options, or 2/3 less if you're willing to accept physical damage taken as any element, but you're not willing to accept physical damage taken as chaos. Once you've done that, you want to spam lesser, greater, or grand embers until you have something genuinely useful. Often this will be a curse effect in your Searing Exarch mod. This may take 60 embers, which is about 65 chaos at the greater tier, if you want to get an exact mod, but if you're willing to settle for 3 or 4 different mods, then you might find that that's even cheaper. If you're following this in a league start scenario, then lesser and greater embers can be quite a bit more expensive than they are in a mature trade league. In that situation, you're going to want to be less picky. So stop rolling over things that are genuinely useful. Just take something that helps your character out for now, and then you can focus on getting something perfect a bit later on once those embers are cheaper, and also once you've got more resources to roll it. If you're not working on a budget, we're going to elevate the most important mod for your character, which will be the damage taken as X mod. So here we're going to use Grand Icors to roll this essential mod. So 7% physical damage from hits taken as fire damage, or whatever it happens to be for your character. Then we're going to apply an exceptional Ember, and then we're going to use an Orb of Conflict. Orbs of Conflict are a bit RNG. I'll put a link down in the description to the exact maths on how they work that's been worked out by players over time. But basically you're 61% to win this step and go from Grand Tier Icor, Exceptional Tier Ember to the other way around, where you've got an Exceptional Tier Icor mod. And this is the cheapest way to get the Exceptional Tier version of physical damage from hits taken as X. Once you've got that, the next step is going to be to elevate from Exceptional to Exquisite Tier, which is going to be 50-50 after you apply another Exceptional Ember to the item. So this is going to be a 61% chance to win the first step, 50% to win the second, but if you do end up losing any of these steps, it's really just 2 Orbs of Conflict you've lost most of the time. Next, you'll decide, do you want to elevate further? It's no longer going to be 61-39 or 50-50 next time. If you do, it's going to be 39-61, which is going to be unfortunate. But if you do elevate the damage shift mod all the way to perfect tier, it's still going to be 8%, same as Exquisite, but you can then Exceptional Ember spam for a perfect second mod, and then you can Orb of Conflict to try for a double Exquisite tier final item. That will tend to be the very best items that you'll get implicits wise, but that is also going to be a considerable additional cost, and you're throwing a lot of resources just to get 1% more of this physical damage shifting mod. Is that worth it? Well, that's up to you. Once you've done this, you've almost completed your item. Your prefixes are done, your suffixes are done, your implicits are done, but there's one more step, and that is to have fun in the labyrinth. That's all I got on this. May your Val Orbs have interesting results, although you probably don't want to use them on these items, and I will see you around.